All right, it's 1 o'clock by my watch, so we'll get underway. Good afternoon, everybody. Great
Good afternoon.
on the call. Thank you for joining us for another Zoom formation call. But a great program again for you today. You know the drill. Please keep the audio on mute unless you're going to ask a question later on at the end of the presentation. Feel free to use the chat. If you're going to ask a question, please put the question in capital letters. So David, who's going to be monitoring the chat box, can see immediately that this is a question and not just a comment or a chat or a criticism or a complaint. It's a question. So with that, I have no more preliminary announcements. It's my pleasure, as always, to introduce my friend and colleague and comrade-in-arms, Rotary International Director, Stephanie Urchik. Stephanie, take it away.
Thank you, Director Peter, and welcome, family of Rotary. So good to see all of you today. And Peter's right, we do have a very special program today. If you are a Rotarian, unless you've been hibernating under a rock, you know that membership is increasingly important to us as an organization. We are a membership organization and we do service, but without members, we have less people to do the service. So of course, there are always two ways to look at membership. One is retaining the people that we have or getting new members. I think all of you know that we have a new strategic plan and action plan, and two of those priorities in our action plan are focused on membership. The first one, expanding our reach, talks to us about looking for new ways to bring people into the magic of Rotary who might not currently be with us for a variety of reasons. And it encourages us to look for new ways to bring people in. This is where our Innovative Club Advocates program was born. The other priority, which is enhancing participant engagement, is a reminder to us that everybody joins Rotary for different reasons, and we need to pay attention to the reasons so that we can deliver value for people. You know, all of us have had a really strange 12 months. There's no doubt that the twin pandemic of COVID as well as the economic instability has changed the way that we've done business. Many people look at what happens to us and say, well, we've lost members because of COVID, but have we? So today we have a very interesting presentation, and we have two special speakers today, but we're going to change up our order a little bit and have our primary presenter first, and then our cameo guest second. So it's my pleasure now to introduce our primary presenter today, past District Governor Terry Weaver. Terry is not unknown to anybody on this call. Terry has been in Rotary for 45 years and has been active in his district and in our zone for many of those years. Terry's a past district governor. He's currently a member of the Rotary Club of Greenville, South Carolina. He is his district's Innovative Club advocate. He is an assistant Rotary coordinator for Zone 33, and he serves our zones as our IT administrator. But it's Terry's professional background coupled with his love of Rotary that makes what he's going to present today so compelling and so interesting to listen to. Terry is an engineer by training. In fact, he's a great engineer. He's in the Engineering Hall of Fame at his university. He has this interest in looking at data and doing research and uncovering the reasons why we have situations. So Terry's really going to spend some time this afternoon sharing with you some interesting research, a little bit that has come out of Rotary International and a little bit that has come from Terry Weaver, and ask you to take a look and make decisions about what you feel is the reason that we're seeing the membership decline that we have in our zones. So Terry, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. Welcome. Thank you very much for being with us today. And the program's now yours.
Thanks, Stephanie. Great to see everybody today. Stephanie invited me to do this several weeks ago, and she also proposed the title, which is COVID or Complacency, You Decide. Now, the reason that we decided to do this is that Stephanie and Peter came back from a board meeting in Evanston and said, you know, we heard some things a little bit different in Evanston than we've been hearing from you. And here's the slide set that was used in the presentation of that material in Evanston. So I'll quickly review that with you. There was a survey done of pandemic-related Rotary reactions, Rotary Club reactions. It was presented in the March board meeting. And it's a survey of roughly 100,000 Rotarians, certainly meaningful sample size, looking at club meetings, club experience, and membership in the COVID environment. Starting with club meetings, as you know, a regular club meeting that occurs both in person and online is now known as a hybrid club meeting. And hybrid club meetings are not simple to produce. You're actually producing two meetings simultaneously that both have to be first class. You have to provide a first class experience for the Zoom audience, and you have to also provide a first class experience for those in the in-person audience, sometimes known as the Zoomers and the Roomers. Now, the advantage of hybrid meetings is, first of all, you can get a much broader range of speakers since no one has to travel. There's no travel time. There's literally just the cameo moment of the speaker. And of course, people can choose whether they want to do something in person or whether they want to do something in the Zoom. It's got some disadvantages. Of course, you do have a virus exposure risk to the in-room audience. That's, of course, reduced with vaccination and other COVID mitigation strategies. If there's a meal involved, it can be a little complex, or some clubs are continuing to pre-bill for meals and don't have that problem. And of course, there is some limitation of interaction through a screen versus being in the room. So of 112,000 responses, the question was, how are clubs meeting? And the answer at this time the survey was taken was 60% mostly online. Then over on the left-hand side, you see an 18% minority of in-person and online. Those are the hybrid meetings where the club is offering both. The club experience, let's take a look at this. The pandemic has not had a large effect on the club experience, and that's to some extent good news. If you look at the number of people who said that they have attended most or all the club meetings, it's over 80%. If you look at the people who responded with respect to their enjoyment of the club meetings, they range from somewhat to a great deal, almost 90%. That's good too. And then the question is, overall, how satisfied are you with your Rotary membership? And this is, of course, in the COVID world. Well, this is great news. Over 90% of the respondents said they were extremely satisfied, and some mostly satisfied, etc. Again, these are remarkable responses. Now let's talk about membership. Will members leave due to the pandemic? 49% said they're neither more nor less likely to remain. Just doesn't matter. And the majority said they're much more likely to remain or more likely to remain. Again, over on the right-hand side, say that as a result of the pandemic, they're less likely to remain. And this is consistent with our own observations and data. Here's the slide that stopped me in my tracks then. Those facts being the outcome of the survey, how can we say the pandemic has accelerated member loss? Now, keeping in mind that the data down below is net membership decline. And here's what I feel is the misleading element of this title slide. Most people would logically interpret the statement, the pandemic has accelerated member loss, to mean members are leaving due to COVID. In fact, they're leaving faster due to COVID. At least that would be my interpretation of that headline. The actual fact is that is not true. The fact is members are leaving at or below historical rates. I'll say that again. Members are leaving Rotary in this COVID environment at or below their historical rates of departure. A better title, I think, would be "The Pandemic Has Slowed Our Attraction of New Members." The pandemic has slowed our attraction of new members. It is not the attrition that's getting in our way. What's getting in our way is clubs convinced themselves that they couldn't operate in this world and basically just threw in the towel with respect to attraction of new members. Well over a dozen clubs in my own district have not attracted a single member since July 1, not one. Clubs just hung up their membership attraction strategies and said, we got a pandemic. Now, I observed this in my own district, and this is the way a lot of this stuff comes about. I'll just look at something in my own district and see something interesting happening, and then I go see if I can validate that across the rest of the zone or across other districts. So here's what I did. Now, I had to hand build this. This is not data that's available from RI. You cannot find out from Rotary International how many members left in any given time window other than a full year. So I'm looking at July through December 31, and I'm looking at that time window in 2016, 17, 18, and 19. I had to hand harvest this data from DACDB, which is why you don't see 17 districts here, but rather only 6. I got enough data to confirm the consistency of this statement in looking at only those 6 districts. So we're looking at 16, 17, 18, and 19. These are the number of people that left between July 1st and December 31st. So averaging those across those entire 4 years kind of smooths out some of the blips. And then took a look at July 1st to December 31, 2020, our immediate past first half of this year. And what I noticed, of course, was that, as I had just observed anecdotally, my own district is losing members at a significantly slower rate in 2020 than we did in exactly the same time window in the prior 4 years. In fact, lower than all but 1 year. Then I took a look at some other districts. Took a look at Peter's district, 7620. 7620 has had remarkably lower attrition during the pandemic. 140 members versus an average of 162 terminations during that same window. And again, the 140, you'll notice, is smaller than every other prior year. 140 member loss is smaller than any prior year of the same time window, July to December. Now, the difference here is 7620 did something with this success. 7620 stood alone with a net gain of plus 30 members at January 1st. Apparently, 7620 decided not to participate in this pandemic from a Rotary membership point of view. Here's 7670, my neighbor to the north, again, lower than average attrition for that same time window every prior year. 7710, one of our flagship districts in Zone 33, 84% of the losses that they had suffered on average for the prior years. And again, you'll notice 114 lower than any of the 4 prior years. So it is not true that our membership decline is based on people leaving Rotary due to the pandemic. Looking at the average of all 6 of these districts, again, 872 members lost versus an average of 920. And you'll notice again, that's lower for these 6 districts than the totals of all but one of the prior years. Now, it is true that a couple of districts, 76, 80, and 90, in the heart of North Carolina, had slightly higher, but only single digits, 157 versus 152 and 150 versus 140 losses. So the fact is that members are leaving Zone 33 at or below historical rates due to the pandemic. COVID era membership decline is due to a lack of attracting members at historical rates. Attrition is under control. In fact, attrition is better than it's been in a whole long time. Thousands of people have joined Rotary that have never been to an in-person Rotary meeting. Thousands of people have joined Rotary that have never been to an in-person Rotary Club meeting. That accounts for a dozen members that my club has attracted that have never been to a Rotary meeting. One of our clubs in District 7750 is up 14 members on the year. Another is up 11. So those clubs decided not to participate in the pandemic from a standpoint of attracting members. Sadly, they're not in the majority. This brings up Rotary's retention myth. Rotary's retention myth goes like this. We attract about 150,000 members in a year and we lose about 170,000. We're pretty good at attracting members. We're just not so good at keeping them. We have a retention problem. That is Rotary's retention myth. Like any good urban legend, it is repeated over and over again. And it's repeated by influential speakers such as RI directors, RI presidents-elect, RI presidents, and even international convention speakers. Here's a shot I took from the floor in Hamburg. Big slide, bigger than life, says Rotary does not have a recruitment problem, it has a retention problem. And here's the trouble with this, folks. I can't find any validation in the data of this statement being true. I can't find any validation that we're pretty good at attracting members. And frankly, we're not that bad at keeping them. The fact is that most clubs that are really good at keeping members are awful at attracting them. I'll show you some examples. I'll say that again. Most clubs that are really good at keeping members are awful at attracting them. In fact, it is slightly cause and effect inverse. That is that if you don't attract many new members, your attrition rate improves. If you don't attract many new members, your attrition rate improves. However, your club shrinks. And there's almost no correlation that I found between retention and club growth. As retention improves, clubs do not grow. Let me show you some data. And here's the data set. This is based on rolling around in this data for about 5 years across 17 districts, 9 states, 960 clubs, and 36,000 Rotarians, and 16 years of data. So here's a case study. Let's take a look at District 7305. Now, I'm not picking on 7305, rather I'm somewhat featuring them because they are somewhat unique in our particular zone. There are 82 Rotary clubs in 7305. That's the first unique thing. They are the largest district in terms of club count in our zone, and the second largest in both zones put together. 16 years of data. And 7305 has the unique distinction of being, first of all, having the largest number of low attrition clubs in the zone. And low attrition being defined as 10% or less. That'd be 90% plus retention. They have the largest number by a factor of at least 2, perhaps 3. They also have the largest number of clubs in chronic membership decline. How can that be? If retention is the answer, how can a district with great retention be seeing membership decline in its largest number of clubs? This just doesn't wash. So I looked at the average attrition and attraction rates in this district over the past 3 years. And here's what that looks like. I'm going to turn on my little highlighter tool here. Yeah, there we go. These are clubs represented by attrition rates, and the vertical bars, the vertical red bars, are the attrition rates of these clubs, and they range from terrible 40% attrition, 30% attrition, 25 is right in here. That means that you're replacing, at 20% attrition, you're replacing your club every 5 years. At 30% attrition, you're replacing it every 3 years, if it's of course staying even. So what you see here is clubs successively better, club by club by club. There's 80 clubs on this graph, until they get up in what we call more of a normal zone. So those clubs above 15%, those clubs have an attrition problem. And what I want to be careful here about is to say that I have trouble with this blanket statement that we're pretty good at attracting members and not so good at keeping them. It's true in this case that roughly half of this district is not very good at keeping them. Now that is high. The fact is that in most districts, that's about a third of the clubs that really have an attrition problem. Then we get the group of clubs that are pretty good at holding on to members, that are losing members at an average rate. Average across Rotary International is 14%. Average across our zone is 14% attrition as well. So these clubs are in the 15% range, ranging up to 10%. Okay, that's pretty good. In fact, it turns out, I've looked at this data over and over and over again. What I found is that there is a threshold right between 8 and 10% that must be the life happens rate. And why do I say that? Because nobody gets better than that. In a typical district, this one being somewhat of an exception, but in a typical district, I'll only find a couple, maybe 3 clubs with attrition rates below 10%. So that must be about as good as it gets. Now, I'll point out that if the average is 14, and if life happens costs us about 8, the fact is that half of our attrition is for reasons we couldn't do anything about anyway. I'll say that again. Half of the attrition we suffer, in this zone anyway, is for reasons we can't control, the life happens reasons. Then you got the largest number of clubs in the zone that have attrition less than 10%. And this is what I'd call world class. I mean, this is really, really, really good. And it's a large number of clubs. Let's take a look at something else. Let's take a look at the attraction rates. Now, the green bars are correlated to the club's red bars. In other words, this is the same club here that's got a 40% attrition rate, and they've got about a 20% attraction rate. Well, you can do the math. That's not working. And you'll notice that the same is true for the majority of these clubs. You just can't overcome the drag of turning over members at a rate of 20 to 30% a year and attract enough to overcome that. So let's take a look at then subtracting the two, subtracting the attrition rates from the attraction rates, and that's what you get with this blue line. Now it's ziggy and zaggy because, of course, we're ranking these clubs from the worst attrition over here on the left to the best attrition over here on the right. But notice the pattern of the zigzags. Notice you can draw a line through these net gain loss rates, and what it demonstrates basically is that clubs that are better at retaining members of this high attrition group do in fact see better results as they get better. In other words, a club at 18% attrition versus a club at 30% attrition is going to be better at growing. Now, they're not net growing, but they are getting closer to break even. Remind you that the break even line's right here, okay? So these clubs can get closer to break even by solving these awful attrition rates. So in that case, this is a group of clubs that's not so good at keeping them, but it's only that group that's not so good at keeping members. Now, what you'd think then, if that were true, if the better clubs get at retaining members, the closer they get to membership break even, you'd think that as they started getting better and better and better at retaining members, that line would continue, but it doesn't. You'll see a couple of outliers here, a couple of outliers that were able to attract enough members. These are really good. These clubs are really good at attracting members, so much that they are able to overcome these attrition rates of above 17%. But you'd expect this line to continue on. In other words, if retention was the answer to membership, what you'd expect is that clubs that are in the 17%, 15%, 12%, 10% range would be better at growing, but they're not. Take a look at the zigzaggy line, which is essentially flat for all this group of clubs that are really good at retaining members. There's no correlation in my work and models. There's no correlation between high retention and club growth. Now, I drew this line across here at a 10% net gain. Let me explain. You would think that clubs with these extraordinary retention rates over here, this is 5% attrition, 95% retention, 96% retention, 98% retention. And none of those clubs with those extraordinary retention rates exceeded an average of a 10% net gain. In fact, none of these clubs on the right-hand side of this graph exceeded an average of a 10% net gain over the 3 years we looked at. How can we explain that? Now let's look at smoothing out this data a little bit. As you know, if you smooth things out by averaging, you get a little bit more of a consistent picture without all these zigs and zags and chops. So what I did is I averaged adjacent clubs in this model, clubs that were very close in terms of attrition rates, such as this group right here, averaged that out, and this is the way that average looks. So here's what happens. This zig and this zag average out to the dark black line. Likewise, this zig and this zag average out to the dark black line. So what you recognize here is that, again, over here on the left-hand side, the clubs that have just terrible attrition rates, 20% plus, ranging up to 17%, what it appears is that as you dig yourself out of these extraordinarily high attrition rates, you can come closer to break even. But it doesn't work on the other side of the fence. My conclusion, folks, is that clubs are willing to work just hard enough at membership to almost maintain membership. Almost maintain or grow membership. And there's a magic number in here. The magic number is this: 2 members a year net bleed. There's something about this, what I call chronic membership decline, and 2 members a year is within the threshold of pain of most clubs. Now, if you wondered, is this unique to 7305, let's take a look at 7620. Looks exactly the same, looks exactly the same. In fact, over here, it would appear that these clubs that are much better at retaining members actually are worse at growing. Here's a club that's retaining members at a rate of 90% and hasn't added 1 single member in the 3-year window that we're looking at. Most clubs are willing just to work just hard enough to almost maintain or grow. Just as success is in sight, they've run multiple series of downs, they've marched down the field, they see the goal line in sight, and they take a knee at the 1-foot line. You'll notice in this district, only one club managed to post a better than 5% a year net gain. Despite, again, some exemplary attrition rates, they simply stopped attracting members. So here's my conclusion. Our narrative that retention is the answer has misdirected clubs membership. It's confused the clubs. Clubs have gotten the idea that if all we work on is retaining members, we're somehow going to grow. It doesn't work that way. The fact is, based on the data you've seen here, I can't see any demonstrable relationship between improving retention and club growth. What happens is, as clubs get better at retention, they simply slack off sooner at attracting new members. As clubs get better at retention, they apparently slack off sooner at attracting new members and keep themselves just about at that 0 net growth waterline. So here's my proposed narrative. First, we're a membership organization. Community service is what we deliver. As a membership organization, there's only one metric of success: consistent, moderate membership growth. If what we are is a membership organization and we're not growing, we are failing. Now, we can say what we want about the wonderful things we do in our community. We can say what we want about our contributions to the Rotary Foundation, to the eradication of polio, but if we're not growing, we are failing. Attrition is real. Members leave membership organizations, and as I mentioned, half of our attrition, roughly that 8% life happens rate, is completely beyond our control. So I'm not saying that retention is a bad idea. It's everything. We need to retain every member possible. We don't have to replace those, but we have to execute intentional strategies that consistently attract new members at a rate that exceeds our attrition rate. This is not obvious, folks, to most clubs, apparently. So my challenge to you is, as the leaders of this outfit, you are the front line in the Army fighting our biggest enemy, which is not Kiwanis and it's not COVID. Our biggest enemy is this complacency that makes it okay for our club to just rock along at about break even or lose 1 or 2 members, and we excuse ourselves from that. Now, if you wonder if complacency is the right word, I went to my favorite research source, Wikipedia, to learn that complacency is a feeling of quiet pleasure or security while unaware of some potential danger or defect. Our narrative has given clubs the quiet pleasure and security that if we're pretty good at keeping members, then our membership is somehow going to be okay. And the data would basically prove that as clubs get really, really good at retaining members, they in fact shrink. As clubs get really good at retaining members in that 8 to 10% rate, it's partially because they're not attracting members at anywhere near that rate, and everybody just loves each other, and everybody loves to come to lunch at the same place. So I'll rest my case at this point. Is it COVID? Is it complacency that's causing Rotary its membership problem? You decide.
Thank you, Terry. I told you, everybody, what a fabulous, fabulous presentation. The first time I heard Terry talk about this, he really blew my socks off. It was like a light bulb went out. I do need to tell you, however, that Peter, Kyle, and I are not among the directors who promulgate the Rotary retention myth. We're not, okay, just so that you know. But I appreciate Terry presenting this information. I'm going to ask Immediate Director, Past Director David Stovall if we have any questions for Terry that have popped up in the chat.
We do have several, Director, and Terry, I would mention, if you, I know you haven't had a chance to look at the chat, but there are a number of compliments in there for you on that. One of the first questions is, do you think that part of the lack of attraction could be due to membership caps, maybe due to meeting space and that type of thing?
We have one club in my district, the second largest club, that is actually roughly at meeting space capacity. Now, of course, that's a problem that was solved by COVID. Nobody is under meeting space restrictions right now. But no, I don't think that's really a factor at all. The factor is that we march down the field, we execute a series of downs, we see ourselves just within inches of that 5 to 10% consistent moderate growth rate, and we see ourselves almost there. We take a knee at the 1 foot line, then we're surprised by two surprise resignations at the end of June, and we're down 1.
Okay, very good. Thank you. This one, I'm going to read it out to you, and maybe it may be in your analysis, but I'm not sure. Has there been an analysis of clubs that are growing to compare what their actual retention rate is? Also, a 10% net growth, I think, is good. If all clubs could achieve this, we would not have a membership growth problem, and the focus should always be on net membership. Leaders should focus on reporting net, not just members attracted or members retained. Your thoughts?
Membership should focus on net. And the only way you can get net is if you attract more than you lose. Now, what we have noticed is that these attrition rates for the same club are very, very consistent year to year. You can take an average of attrition for a club over 3 years, and you can essentially predict that same level of attrition unless something changes. Now, that's the good news for these super high attrition clubs. These super high attrition clubs, there's a problem with the product. Members are voting with their feet. So when you have 20, 25, 30% of your members leaving your club every year, you got to assume that somebody's not happy. So those need to be fixed, and those need to be fixed by a combination of introspection, assessing the club, finding out what is wrong with the club and fixing that. The lion's share of clubs that are meaningfully growing have average to moderate attrition. The lion's share of clubs that are growing have attrition in that 10 to 15% range.
So the next one is to ask if the meeting will be recorded and have access to the slides. It is being recorded, and it will be posted to the zone's Facebook page, social media later in the day, and be available there for you to download, share with your clubs, your membership, and that type of thing. But the remainder of the question, Terry says, are you sharing this information with Rotary International headquarters?
Haven't been invited to do so.
Stephanie and Peter may have to work on that for you. How's that? So if you have other questions for Terry, please put them in the chat box. How do you feel that satellite clubs play into the equation for us long term, Terry?
Well, I think the entire ICA strategy speaks exactly to this complacency we're talking about. There is a consistent feeling, you've all traveled your districts, I've traveled mine, and what I found is most every Rotary Club thinks it's about the right size. Now, somehow that size ranges from 14 to 220 in my district, but they're all just about the right size. And it's that right size complacency mentality that is keeping us from growing. If most clubs don't want to grow, which appears to be the fact, most clubs don't want to grow, some are going to shrink just due to membership failure, and that's going to be a net membership decline. The only fix for that is new clubs that are not afflicted. We've got a club in my district that you'd swear in their bylaws, it says this Rotary Club shall be 47 members. I've got data going back 16 years, 47 members, plus or minus one or two, almost straight line. It's uncanny.
Okay, Terry, thank you so much for being with us today. We've got to move on with the rest of our program. Back to you, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director David. And thank you again, Terry, for a very informative session. You know, Terry made us think about some words differently. You know, the A word, attrition, is not really our enemy. It's attraction. And he introduced another concept, complacency. You know, very often when I talk to Rotary clubs and I say, who's on your membership committee? I see one or two hands go up. The fact is everybody in the club is part of the membership group. It's our job as Rotarians to extend the magic of Rotary and to bring new people in. So complacency, as Terry has suggested, really is something we need to deal with. Our next speaker, our cameo guest today, is a clinically licensed psychologist, Dr. Mary Berg, a Rotarian from Johnstown, PA, who's going to share with us some information about complacency. Mary has a lot of Rotary experience. She's been a district governor, she's been a zone coordinator, a training leader, and has been a president's rep on more than one occasion. But most importantly, she's serving as my aide this year. So please let me introduce my friend and our Rotary colleague, Dr. Mary Berg. Mary, it's yours.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And thank you, Terry, for really laying all this groundwork about complacency. And so I'm going to take your Wikipedia definition and bump it up a notch and talk a little bit about what complacency is from a psychological point of view. So basically, it means that you are overly content about settling for less than you desire and less that you're capable of. It's like confusing the feeling of comfortable with the feeling of fulfilled. So how does this happen? Well, there are actually a number of things that can cause complacency. For instance, complacency can arise from too much familiarity with a circumstance, or when our goals lose their importance, when we lack motivation or a true commitment, we can become complacent. And I think that true commitment component is a big part of what Terry was talking about. But many times complacency actually arises from fear of failure or some fear in and of itself. We become afraid because typically the next step feels too hard or too scary. We're afraid of making somebody angry or upset. So we retreat and we tell ourselves that everything is fine just the way it is. And I think we see that a lot in our membership strategy. Now, complacency can also be rooted in what psychologists call confirmation bias. And this is the tendency to look for information that supports rather than rejects our preconceptions. And this happens when we interpret evidence that continues to confirm our existing beliefs while we continue to reject or ignore any data to the contrary. Now, Stephanie, regardless of the underlying cause, and I think all of those causes do speak to probably what's happening in all of our clubs, but regardless of the underlying cause, being complacent is about letting your guard down and being less focused, less committed to doing the things that you need to do to ensure long-term success. And most people are complacent simply because it's easier than putting out the effort to observe, to understand, plan, and to execute. And I think we certainly see this in membership in Rotary. But there are three big things that you can do, no matter what the circumstance, to avoid complacent behavior. Now, the first, and I think this speaks really well to what you just talked about, Stephanie, in membership committees, the first thing to do is to surround yourself or to build your team with people who will give you realistic and truthful feedback. Because the strongest outcomes often result when we have many failures. And if you have only those people around you who tell you the nice things, it's going to be a lot more difficult to see your weaknesses and to make the necessary changes. And it's actually easier to just quit or give up when you first fail. Now, the second thing you can do is to focus on the process instead of the outcome. Now, I know outcome would mean numbers, but I think the process of gaining memberships is very, very important and very unique to each club. But bottom line is that successful people and organizations have typically developed a process for achieving and sustaining excellence. And they follow that approach with strong discipline. And if they don't achieve their goals, what do? They adapt. They adapt the process. And people who focus only on the outcome, the number, might achieve success once or twice, but typically it's not sustainable. And so the key element here is to learn and adapt continuously. Now, the third thing, and this is something I believe in really wholeheartedly, the third thing is to always start every day from point A. This means that you have to every single day think about your goal and start over. Sustainable excellence is about constant improvement and not just simply achieving one desired outcome. So whatever the task, membership, or anything else, by approaching each day with the goal of getting better, you can avoid becoming complacent. So those are my three big tips, Stephanie. I hope that helps and helps everyone think about membership in a different way.
Thank you, Mary. Outstanding. I love those tips. I'm going to start every day at point A. Folk, we have had two tremendous presentations today, both very thoughtful. I encourage you to think about what Terry outlined, the suggestions that Mary has given you. You're all on WhatsApp. Start a conversation. Discuss the analysis that Terry provided. Listen to the recording. We need to move on both these things. We need to move on complacency and we need to move on membership attraction. And today we were given some very good tips on how to go about it. So I really hope you will take on board what you've heard, discuss it within your clubs, discuss it within amongst yourselves. This really has been fantastic. So a big thank you, and please join me in a big loud applause for Terry and Mary. And as you know, we have these calls every month. We'll be having another Zoomformation call on May the 3rd at 1 p.m. The topic to be determined, but mark your calendars now for May the 3rd at 1 p.m. You'll have another outstanding presentation. And it is so neat that we're having presentations from Rotarians and our own 2 zones. So with that, we've come to the end of our session. As is normal, we finish with the 4-way test. So please join Stephanie and myself and David as we recite together the 4-way test. Of all the things we think, say, and do, 1, is it the truth?
Is it the truth?
2,
Is it fair to all concerned?
3, will it build
Will it build
goodwill
goodwill
and
and
better
better
friendships?
friendships?
4,
Will it be
Beneficial to all
concerned.
concerned?
Thank you all. Have a great day. Have a great month. And we'll see you on May the 3rd.